Welcome back everybody to Geology 101. This time we are going to cover earthquakes. So take a look at this photo. You notice this building here has been completely toppled over. This is actually an earthquake, something about a 6.4 magnitude that happened in Taiwan. Before we get into earthquakes though, we need to review a few things from the previous section. First off, we're looking at convergent margins, the first two here, this subduction zone, continental collision zone. We have our divergent margins or divergent plate boundaries and our transform fault boundaries. Now, if we look, we have the yellow, which are shallow earthquakes, blue, which are deep earthquakes. So deep earthquakes are associated with what? Subduction zones and continental collision zones. You get modest, very, very small earthquake activity at divergent margins, places like mid-ocean ridges. And you do get shallow earthquakes, but they can be very powerful earthquakes at transform boundaries. So let's get into it. Section 1, we are covering earthquake basics. Now, what are we looking at here? So earthquakes occur whenever you have two blocks of earth close together and they slide past each other very, very suddenly. Now, where exactly they slide past each other, that crack, that broken surface between them, is called the fault. And if we look at this picture here, right, we have our fault separating two blocks of the earth. Now, what happens next? Well, as the two blocks move, they release a tremendous amount of energy, and all of that energy comes outward from the origin, the original point, called the focus, down here, sometimes called the hypocenter. Same thing. So after this, the energy travels in the form of seismic waves outward in all direction. You can think of these as being like waves in water or a pond. And usually, the setting here, bigger picture, is going to be near a plate boundary, but not always. Study of earthquakes is called seismology, and we'll get into this in a bit. Now, let's take a moment to look at a bit of a more detailed picture. Here is our fault, our big crack in the earth. Here is our focus, that is the point where the energy originates. And we have something else here called the epicenter. What is this? Well, focus is the origin of the earthquake, the point where the energy is released, but the epicenter is the point immediately above the focus. If you were standing here, a person on the ground, the epicenter is a place where you would feel the most shaking. It's going to be the point on the surface right above the focus. Now, after we have our main earthquake, the big one, something here in the diagram, really big earthquake, don't worry about what magnitude means for now, we'll also get these other smaller earthquakes. So there's this big release of energy for the main earthquake, but some of the pressure, some of the stress moves elsewhere on the fault, and so you have this cascading series of smaller and smaller earthquakes. And this can go on for months, sometimes even years worth of aftershock earthquakes. You can get hundreds of these or even thousands of them. Now, the map here is showing not necessarily where the biggest and most frequent earthquakes are, but where the biggest risks are to human life. So, as you would imagine, hear about all the time, we have earthquakes over in California and including some up into Oregon and Washington on the west coast. We have earthquakes in Alaska, massive earthquakes up there. But there's a couple other places that maybe you wouldn't expect. For example, there is earthquake activity in Hawaii. And I will actually give 5 points of extra credit to anybody who is the first one from each class to email me and tell me why that might be the case. There's also earthquake activity here, kind of in the middle of the continent. Again, can be far away from the plate boundary sometimes. This is a result of older structures, very, very deeply buried, which you might call faults in the basement of the Earth. Old structures get reactivated and cause earthquakes. And we can also see a little bit of earthquake activity here in southern Oklahoma, North Texas area. This earthquake activity is not natural. It is caused almost entirely by wastewater injection as a result of hydraulic fracturing, aka fracking. Now, this map will zoom out a little bit. What are the observations here, the big patterns? Well, first, not a lot of earthquakes, not a lot of seismic activity on the interiors of plates, the interiors of continents. Zone here, no earthquakes. Big zone here, no earthquakes. Interior of this continent, interior of this continent, no earthquakes. On the west coast of North America, going all the way up into Alaska, actually everything that sort of rims the Pacific Ocean over here, and over here as well, we have seismic activity, more detail on this in a bit. And we have activity here, what you might call the Alpine Belt over here in Europe, going all the way over to the Himalayas. So here, maybe we shift the world map over a little bit. Now we can see the entire circum-Pacific earthquake belt. If you've ever seen the Ring of Fire for volcanoes, maybe this will look familiar. But again, we're talking about earthquakes here. You can see actually a lot of earthquakes over here in the Indonesia, Malaysia area. Everything up here through Japan, all the way around the rim of the Pacific Ocean, down through South America, and our other belt, the Alpine Himalayan belt, stretching through Europe and over into the Indian subcontinent. So what do we know about earthquake zones? Where do earthquakes happen? 80% of them about on this circum-Pacific belt, about 17% over in the Alpine Himalayan region, which leaves about 2% which are scattered throughout the rest of the world, including the United States, apart from the West Coast. Indonesia actually has the most earthquakes of any country. Each year, on average, they have the most. Now, let's get to the good part. Where are earthquakes most likely to occur in Arizona? Take a moment and think about it. What do you think it would be? And the answer is northern Arizona. Now, something to clarify here. Very likely, if you are on the western part of Arizona here, including out into Yuma, you would get a lot of shaking, but you would be feeling earthquakes that are coming from elsewhere, in Mexico or in California. As far as earthquakes that originate in Arizona, this area up in Flagstaff is actually the worst, northern Arizona. Stick around, next section we cover faults.